Okay, so we have seen future tenses in 4 aspects, present tenses in 4 aspects, past tenses in 4 aspects. Today we're looking at infinitives and, why not, 2 plus infinitives in 4 aspects. And of course, infinitives and 2 plus infinitives are identical, except 2 plus infinitives have a 2 before the rest of it. And so that's why I've done them together, because I know that they look the same, you know, exactly the same. It's just that this one's got a 2 here as well. And I want you to see that we use, or I want you to remember that we use infinitives, bare infinitives without 2, after modal verbs. Yeah, must, can, could, will, would. Future tenses actually look exactly the same as infinitives. And that's because will is a modal verb. And so you get modal verb plus infinitive, or, you know, you get will drive, simple. Will be driving, future continuous. Will have driven, future perfect. Will have been driving, future perfect continuous. Well, with the infinitives, you get the same. You just get a modal verb and then an infinitive, must drive, or must be driving, or must have driven, or must have been driving. And that's for the simple, continuous, perfect, perfect continuous. So you can see they look exactly the same as the will forms, as the future forms that we studied in the previous class. And that's why I've done them in this order, because I think it's logical that now you study modal verb and different aspects. And that's because will is a modal verb. And so you have already studied this, what we're going to do right now, but you studied it with will, with the modal verb will. Now we're going to look at some other modal verbs like must, should, and I must admit there are more, but I'm just going to look at must and should in this class to look at infinitives. And then I'm going to move on to seem, which takes 2 plus infinitive in 4 different aspects. And also the passive forms, which you might remember when you say he is said, he is thought, he is believed, he is known. You very often get these simple continuous perfect and perfect continuous with the 2 plus infinitive that comes afterwards. So you will see what I am talking about in a moment. And of course, we'll look at some common mistakes as well. But let me start by saying that you get the infinitives in 4 different aspects after modal verbs, and when you do this, usually it's speculation or deduction. You are speculating about the present if it's in simple. Yeah, if it's modal verb simple, it's usually about the present. You know, it's not with will, because that's future. But if you say he must, so he must drive, he owns a car, well, then you are talking about the present. You mean he must drive right now in the present. Whereas if you say he must have driven, then you are talking about the past. You know, you're saying he must have driven here. So he's right with you at your house. Maybe he's sitting on the sofa and you say to your other friend, oh, he must have driven here. I can see his car outside. Yeah, logical deduction. And so it's for that we use these modal verbs in 4 aspects for speculation and deduction. But I must admit, with should, we use it for criticism rather than speculation or deduction. And we'll go into more detail when we see these ones. But let's quickly look at must then, which means you're sure something is the case or was the case. So let's look at must drive or must be driving, must have driven, must have been driving. All 4 are possible and fairly common. But of course, as always, the simple is the most common, then the continuous, then the perfect, and then the perfect continuous at the bottom. Yeah, it's always like that, always, more or less. So he must drive, he owns a car. Yeah, this is a logical deduction about something in the present. He must drive, I know he must drive, I'm sure he must drive, and that's what that means. It means I'm sure, 99% sure, he owns a car, yeah? And if he owns a car, well, then he must drive. I mean, why would he buy a car if he didn't drive? So, of course, he must drive, he owns a car. And the opposite would be he can't drive. He doesn't, and that's why he doesn't own a car, something like that. But he can't drive is the opposite of he must drive, okay? Now compare that with he must be driving at the moment. Yeah, his car isn't outside. So maybe you are waiting for your friend. Maybe you've gone to visit him at his house and you notice that his car isn't outside his house. And so you say to Pete, your other friend, he must be driving at the moment. His car isn't here, so he must be driving right at this moment.